Kaum ein Energieträger spiegelt die Widersprüche der letzten Jahre so deutlich wider wie Erdgas. Lange galt es ja als Brücke. Es war flexibler, es ist sauberer als Kohle, es ist unverzichtbar für die Versorgungssicherheit. So war die Erzählung. Die Gaskrise hat diese Erdgasbrücke in eine grüne Zukunft aber massiv erschüttert. Das so selbstverständlich verfügbare und ja auch billige Gas gab es dann nicht mehr. In der Diskussion zur neuen Versorgungsstrukturen kam es dann schnell zu einem neuen Bild: Erdgas als Blockade. Die Befürchtung war, neue Abhängigkeiten bei der Beschaffung, überdimensionierte LNG-Terminals, überhöhte Preise und auch die noch längere Bindung an einen fossilen Energieträger. Heute hat sich die Versorgungslage wieder einigermaßen normalisiert. Erdgas macht 25% des Gesamtenergiebedarfs in Deutschland aus. Ist es also eine notwendige Brücke auf dem Weg in die Klimaneutralität oder ist es doch eher eine Blockade? Welche Rolle kann und sollte Erdgas in der für einen zukünftigen Energiemix spielen? Diesen Fragen geht das heutige Programm nach. Schön, dass Sie da sind und mit uns auf Antwortsuche gehen. Herzlich willkommen zum zweiten Tag des eWorld Kickoff. Mein Name ist Anne Burs. Ich leite den Programmbereich der eWorld und freue mich, dass wir die nächsten etwa 2 Stunden tiefer in das Thema eintauchen.
My name is Anne Burs, and I'm very pleased that we talk together for the next 2 hours.
Thank you for joining today's conference and welcome to the second day of the eWorld Kickoff. My name is Anne Burs. I am heading the eWorld conference team and I am very much looking forward to spending the next about 2 hours together. We have prepared an English and a German live stream, so you are welcome to choose whichever is best for you. You can find both links in the agenda. Auch noch einmal auf Deutsch. Wir haben einen Stream auf
And
Deutsch
now
und
in
einen
German, I would like to
Englisch
repeat,
für
we've
Sie
got a
vorbereitet.
stream in
Sie können
German
also
and
gerne
another
jederzeit
stream in
das
English, so
aussuchen,
you
was für
can
Sie am besten zu
choose
hören
whatever
ist. Sie
language you
finden die
prefer.
Links beide in der
You will
Agenda.
find both links on the agenda.
Damit mal einen Blick auf das Programm. Was haben wir denn überhaupt
But let's
vor?
now look at the program. What are we
eWorld
going
Kickoff läuft
to
über
do
3
today?
Tage,
The
genauso wie
kickoff
vorher auch.
is a 3-day
Gestern ging
event,
es um die
the same as
Herausforderungen,
the
vor
trade show.
denen
Yesterday, we
deutsche und
talked
europäische
about the
Stromnetzbetreiber
challenges
aktuell stehen.
that the
Es ist
German and
eine ziemlich
European grid
internationale Runde und
operators are
die hat
currently facing.
herausgearbeitet,
It was an
dass eigentlich
international
alle vor sehr,
discussion
sehr
that
ähnlichen
showed that
Herausforderungen stehen,
everybody is
aber
facing more or less the
nationale
same
unterschiedliche
challenges, but
Regulierungen und
that
Regelungen dann doch
there are
Konkurrenzsituationen
different
schaffen, die
national
für die Runde gar nicht
regulations
unbedingt
that
so sein
create
müssen.
competition that
An Lösungsvorschlägen
is
dazu
not really
gab aus der Runde
necessary.
können Sie gerne noch
The
nachschauen.
suggestions
Der
and
Stream ist weiter
proposals made
einsehbar.
by the panelists can
Morgen
be
steht
seen
dann die
in the
Energiewende
stream.
auf
The
kommunaler
stream is still
Ebene
available
im
to you.
Fokus.
Tomorrow we will talk
Es
about
wird
the
darum gehen,
energy
wie
transition
Kooperation verschiedener
on the
Akteure
municipal
zum Gelingen
level.
der
We will
Energiewende
talk
beitragen
about
kann.
how different
Ich freue
players
mich
can
schon, wenn wir uns auch
cooperate
morgen um
in
10
the
Uhr sehen.
energy
Die
transition.
Anmeldung geht auch da
I'm
über
looking
die
forward to meeting you
virtuelle
tomorrow as well. You can register for the
Was haben
event
wir jetzt
in
aber
the
heute
eWorld
vor?
community.
Das heutige
But
Programm
what
startet
are
gleich
we
mit einem
doing
Kaminfeuer.
today? We will
Das
start
findet auf Deutsch
today
statt
with an
und wird sich um die Rolle
interview that
Deutschlands
will
im und auch
be
für
in
den
German,
europäischen
and it
Gasmarkt
will
machen.
deal with
Im
the
Anschluss
role of
diskutiert dann ein Panel
Germany
die
and Europe in the
übergreifende
European
Frage
gas
für
market.
heute. Wird Erdgas
Then we'll
Brücke
have a
oder
panel
Blockade?
discussion
Oder der
on the
Joker-Antwort
main
lieber
topic of
yes?
today.
Gegen
Will
12 Uhr
natural gas
beenden
be
wir
a
dann diesen
bridge or
zweiten
a
Tag des
blockade
eWorld
or
Kickoff und
both?
haben sicherlich eine
Around
Idee,
12
welche Rolle
o'clock, we will
Gas
end
im
the second
zukünftigen
day of the
Energiemix
eWorld
spielen kann.
kickoff, and we hope that you'll have an
Wenn bei
idea
Ihnen während
which
des Programms
of,
Fragen
of the role
aufkommen,
gas will
dann
play in the
haben wir
future
für
energy
Sie ein
mix.
Tool vorbereitet.
If you have
Der
any
Frag
questions, then
jetzt
we
funktioniert auf
prepared a
Deutsch
tool
und
for you.
Englisch.
It's
Sie
called
können
Frag
das
jetzt.
über
It
den
works in German and in
angezeigten
English,
QR-Code
and you can
aufrufen
access it
und Ihre
using
Fragen
the
dort
QR code
einstellen.
shown on the
Ich habe
screen
das im
today.
Blick und gebe die Fragen dann
I
weiter an
will
unsere
then
Gäste.
watch
Alles klar.
the questions and I will pass on the questions to our guests.
So, das wären die technischen und
Okay,
Housekeeping
these
Rules, würde
were
ich
the
sagen.
housekeeping
Damit können wir gerne
comments, and
einsteigen
now we
in das
can
heutige Programm.
start with the
Ich begrüße
program
dazu
for today
sehr
right
herzlich
away. And I
Ludwig
would like
Möhring
to
als
extend a
meinen
very
mein
warm welcome to
Team-Korrespondenten.
Ludwig Möhrim
Er ist Geschäftsführer des
as
Bundesverbands Erdgas,
the
Erdöl und Geoenergie. Herzlich willkommen,
interview
Herr Möhring. Schön, dass Sie da
partner
sind.
today. He is
Schönen guten
the
Morgen,
general
Frau
manager
Daniels.
of the
Sie sind jetzt seit
Federal
über 7
Association for
Jahren beim
Natural Gas, Crude
BMWE, so
Oil
heißt
and
es ja der
Geoenergy,
Verbandsplatz. Und davor waren Sie bei
BWEG.
verschiedenen großen
You've
Playern
been
in der
working there for
Gasbranche, zum
7
Beispiel
years
Sefe
now.
oder
Before
Shell.
you
Was
worked for
war denn für Sie
Sefe
oder was
and
ist
for
für Sie so
Shell,
spannend
major
am
players in the
Gassektor,
gas
dass Sie
sector. What is so
Ihre
interesting in the
Berufung
gas
sehen, Ihre
sector
ganze
for
Karriere
you
dort?
that you see this as
Ja,
your
in der Tat. Und
vocation?
mittlerweile fange ich an,
Good
Jahrzehnte festzuzählen und
question.
nicht mehr die Jahre mir
And
insgesamt.
I'm not really
So
counting years,
langweilig
but
die Antwort auf
decades now.
CH4
Well,
sich
perhaps a
darstellen mag,
product
so
CH4
spannend ist ehrlich
seems very
gesagt
boring, but
das im
it's not.
Gesamtkontext und
And
darin wir uns heute auch
natural
kurz
gas is
unterhalten,
very
das
exciting in the general
Gasthema,
context. And
politisch,
this
das
is what we are
Gasthema
going to
macht,
talk
politisch
about
schwach
today.
aufgrund gewisser
Natural gas
Zusammenhänge,
has
die
always been a
dahergehende.
political
Das
product,
ist
will
aber
always
auch
be a
für die
political
Energiewirtschaft
progress
und das
product, and we'll talk
müssen
about
wir
it
alle immer im
today.
Kopf haben von
But natural gas
enormer
is
Bedeutung.
also
Erdgas
of
steht
enormous
in der
importance for the
Beschleunigung
energy
für eine
supply.
Energiewende, nämlich
Natural
eine
gas,
Energiewende in den
even in the energy
60er, 80er Jahren,
transition,
als wir uns aus
that
Kohle und
compared
zum
to the
Beispiel
60s,
Wärmemasse
70s, and
verabschiedet haben
80s,
und
where
Erdgas
we said
abgelöst ist.
goodbye
Also
to
Spannung
oil,
seit vielen,
has
vielen
always been an
Jahrzehnten und ich
important
hätte nicht
product.
gedacht, dass
So,
ich
natural
nach
gas
meiner
has
Zeit
been
bei
a
einem
major
börsengebundenen
player for
Unternehmen,
many,
in dem
many
ich viel gesehen
decades.
habe am
And
internationalen Gasmarkt,
in my career, I saw a
feststellen
lot of
musste, er ist noch
developments,
lange
and
nicht
then
vorbei und
suddenly I
immer
had
wieder neue
to
große
say,
Herausforderungen.
no, natural gas will
Das
not
schließt
be
ja ein
at the
bisschen
end
an
of its path,
was
but
wir
it will
gestern auch in
continue
der
to be
Runde gehört
important.
haben. Da hieß es, dass
Yes,
unser
thank you very much. This links
Energieversorgungssystem
up to what we heard
altmodell für
yesterday.
viele
We heard
fossile
that
zentrale
the energy
Energieträger.
system is made
Und
for the
jetzt stehen
old
wir vor der
world with the
Frage, wie
fossil
ändern wir das
fuels, and now
eigentlich,
we
wenn
are
es um
facing the
dezentrale
question, how
Energie
can
geht,
we
viele neue Anforderungen.
change this if the system
Und
is
es
more
wird keinen Schalter
decentralized
geben,
and
mit
we've
dem
got
man das
new
umstellt,
requirements?
Ja.
sondern man
And there
wird
is no
da den
switch
Weg
that you
gehen.
can just flick and
Und wie
everything
wir
is
den Weg
changed, but we have
gehen
to
können
develop
oder
a
wie
path
vielleicht ein
towards this
erster
future.
Schritt auf diesem Weg sein
And
kann, ein
how we
Schritt
can
sein
do
könnte. Da
this,
haben wir
or what the
einen
first steps
wunderbaren
can be
Gast
on this path,
eingeladen. Das
will
war
now
im
also be
Bundeswirtschafts- und Energieministerium.
reflected by our
Sozusagen
guest
das, was Sie
from
können
the Federal
gerne vorstellen
Ministry
und dann ein
for
bisschen löchern
Economic
mit
Affairs
Fragen
and
zu dem Weg, auf
Energy.
diesem Weg, wo wir
And
gehen.
I suggest that you
Ja,
interview
vielen
him
Dank,
and
Frau
ask a
Daniels.
few questions.
Ja,
Yes,
lieber
thank
Herr
you very
Lücke,
much, Mrs. Bors.
großartig,
Mr.
dass
Lücke,
wir
it's
heute
excellent to
miteinander
see you
sprechen
here
können,
today. It's great to have the
und dass wir ein
opportunity
bisschen
to
mehr
talk to
Zeit
you
haben als
today.
die
And it's great
45
to have a little
Minuten,
more
in
time
denen wir in
than
aller Kürze
just
diskutieren.
5 or 10 minutes where you have to
Vielleicht noch
give a
3
very
Stellen, die
short
ich immer schon mal
statement.
stellen wollte. Das ist auch
I will,
prima.
can now ask
Ich
questions
darf
that I
aber
always wanted to
unseren
ask, and this
Zuhörerinnen
is
und
also
Zuhörern und
great.
Zuschauerinnen und
But
Zuschauern
first, I
hier
would like
ganz kurz
to
Herrn Lücke vorstellen. Herr Lücke ist
present
im
Mr. Lücke
BMWE
to the
guter
audience.
Abteilungsleiter
Mr.
der
Lücke
2022
is
zur Bewältigung der
section
Energiekrise
head
gegründeten Abteilung, die zuständig ist unter
for
anderem für
the
Energiesicherheit,
department that
für
is
Erdgas,
that
Gas
is
und die
responsible for
versorgende Infrastruktur.
energy
Also Sie sind,
supply,
wie Sie hören
energy
können, an einer ganz zentralen Stelle für die Themen
products, and he
Energiesicherheit und
is
auch in
in the
Zukunft für
ministry
unsere
and working at a central
Erdgasversorgung
point
und Energieversorgung. Darauf werde ich
for
kommen.
our
Sie warten
energy
ja auf eine
supply
Antwort,
and our gas supply
die
for the
sicherlich
future.
jetzt in einem Kontext, der immer politisch sein wird, wie ich das
In a
gesagt habe.
context that will always
Herr
be,
Lücke,
be very
großartig, dass wir das
political, as I
diskutieren
already
können. Lassen
said.
Sie mich
Mr. Lücke,
kurz
it's great to have this
mit einem
discussion
Initiativbericht
today, and I would
beginnen.
like
Dann
to
steigen wir
set the scene, first of all, before we really
die
start with our
Erdgasindustrie kennen,
discussion.
was ja nun wirklich seit Jahrzehnten gilt,
Those
Unsicherheit
who
auch im
know
globalen
the
Kontext. Fakt
natural
ist, im
gas
Moment sehen wir
industry
Unsicherheiten
have
tatsächlich, ehrlich gesagt,
been
wohin man schaut. Die künftige Rolle
have
von
known
Erdgas, meine Botschaft
insecurities and
ist,
uncertainties for
Unsicherheit ist
years.
da,
Mrs. Bose
und
already
schwierig
mentioned this.
vorhersehbar.
It's now very
Dann
difficult to
die
predict the demand for
Versorgungssicherheit ist eine
natural
große
gas.
Frage.
Security of
Preise
supply
sind
is a
ein
major
wesentliches
issue
Thema.
for us.
Die
Prices
beiden
are a
größten
huge topic. And the
Erdgasimporteure sind
two
seit 30 Jahren
largest
im
importers of
Verbände
natural
einbezogen,
gas
dass wir sagen,
are now owned by the
ausgeglichener
federal
werden. Das sind
government
noch
since the Russian
stehen aber
oil
nicht kaum noch in Land und
crisis.
verteilt. Die
And
Bundesregierung
they will be
rasselt aus
sold
allen
in the coming
Himmelsrichtungen
years. And now the federal
Impulse
government
ein, mit denen sie
suddenly
umzugehen
is
haben. Einige werden wir
facing
heute
new
ansprechen können.
comments and issues coming from
Insbesondere
all
wird es
sides. Some
für
of
mich
them
darum
we
gehen,
can
und ich
talk
spreche
about
immer,
today.
da sind
But now
vielleicht
for
sogar vielleicht
me,
30 Jahre im
and
Gasverkauf unterwegs,
I have been in the gas
sind wir immer
business
für so ein
for so
bisschen unterwegs
long,
waren. Wie können
and
wir
I have
den
talked to
Markt
all the major
ins
customers. So
verlässliche,
a question
bezahlbare
for me
Versorgung
is, how
begleiten?
can
Natürlich, und
we
wir sind in einer
ensure a
Transformation.
reliable and
Nur solange
affordable supply in our market. And we are still in a transition phase because we still need natural gas, but this is already an uncertainty what will happen in the future. And let me start, Mr. Lücke, by talking about the role of natural gas in the transformation. What will be the role of natural gas in the future? What is your view? What do you think about the development of natural gas in the future? Because it's a very strong driver for what will happen regarding the gas supply in Germany and in Europe. Thank you very much, Mr. Möhring, for the nice words of introduction and the praise of the federal government. And thank you very much, Mrs. Boers, for the invitation to talk about the gas supply situation and the role natural gas is playing in Germany right now. It's a very complex issue, as you already mentioned and outlined. And Mrs. Boers, you said that natural gas was first planned as a transition energy. Is it now a blockade? And this is exactly the point that you were mentioning, Mr. Möhring. What about the role of natural gas in the transformation? So your question is it still a bridge? Is there still a transformation? And here the basic view is, first of all, yes. In 2022, we had a major rupture. There was a clear cut in natural gas supply, and I do not want to talk about the geopolitical situation right now. I may come back to this later in our discussion. But even before 2022, we had the climate change discussions. It's something that cannot be debated. We know that climate change is happening and that there needs to be a transformation so that gas is required in this transformation phase is something that is undisputed. And each federal government is setting its own focus points. In the last term of office, there was a very clear pathway for the transformation, how it should be done, and what role gas would play with systems, long-term scenarios, development strategies. And we also had some calculations and estimations what would be needed when and where. And under the new government with Minister Reiche, also supported by our Chancellor, Mr. Merz, it was said that we have to review the path that we have been going so far and the path towards energy transition and the transformation. And this is what is ongoing right now. Yesterday, the monitoring report was presented, and Mrs. Reiche presented the major adjustments that will be necessary. But nevertheless, natural gas will still be required, at least during the transformation phase, and we want to have a good and climate neutral industry. It's more a question how we get to where we want to be. How much natural gas will we need? Where can we reduce the consumption of natural gas? So the natural gas consumption in Germany and in Europe clearly was reduced, and this continues to be our goal, but it's not our goal to do it at all costs and by all means to get away from natural gas. And this sounds very general, but we still have to clarify a lot of things that also includes the necessity for gas-fired power plants and the grids. So we still have to do some adjustments, but the role of natural gas as such is still unchanged. Thank you very much, Mr. Lücke. I think this is something that is very well respected and accepted everywhere, and it's not disputed. Of course, we still need natural gas. This is not disputed by the lobby organizations such as Deutsche Umwelthilfe either. And we will see that we will continue to need this. Thank you very much for also mentioning the monitoring report and Mrs. Reiche and her 10-point plan. But then the natural gas strategy was not really mentioned there. Mrs. Bors already said that 25% of the energy market is still for natural gas in a shrinking market, of course, but still 25% of natural gas. Is it a big surprise that this was not addressed in the 10-point plan, or do you think that it's in line with what addressed by Mrs. Reiche?
Natürlich, der Erdgasbedarf hängt ja auch von vielen Dingen ab. Deshalb, wenn man das als Brücke sieht.
Well, first and foremost, of course, the demand for natural gas depends on many different things. If you regard this to be a bridge, the question is how long and how wide is that bridge supposed to be? You have to keep in mind that there is the hydrogen ramp up to be considered. So if you want to use natural gas, or if you believe that natural gas is going to lose its importance over time, you have to consider the parallel ramp up or phase out of natural gas, as I said, in parallel with, for instance, hydrogen, and then keep in mind the reliability or development of more reliable sources from renewable energy carriers. So it's not really natural gas that is setting the points, but it is an auxiliary means, and it depends on how long it will still be needed. And the coalition agreement mentions the 20 gigawatt of power plant performance. That is something that will also need coordination at the European level, but basically that is an issue that has so far not changed. Well, personally, I fully agree. Thank you for pointing this out. But let's get to another point on the supply with natural gas. And Börs has said it is not so much interrelated with an actual need to have natural gas, but more related to the question of this bridge function. And are we, for instance, satisfied with the extent to which our storage facilities are filled at the moment? Of course, we have different sources to get gas into the country during the winter, but are you happy with the reserve situation at the moment? Of course, it's always great to have 100 or 120% utilization of storage capacities, but of course there has been more and more people claiming that we should be worried about the lack of reserves, and we might have to go back to previous levels in a short time, but these worries haven't proven to be accurate. We have a very good storage situation. We have good reserves. The storage facilities are still filling up. And if we get more capacities, we will be able to fill the storage even to a wider extent, so we don't have to be worried here. And in comparison with 2022, we also have more alternatives at the moment. We have the LNG terminals for further supply. So we have different options, and we don't need to focus so much on storage anymore. And the more options you have, the more stability you have, and the more security. Well, you've mentioned LNG. Of course, you have to take an integrated approach, and every LNG tank that reaches us during the winter months is basically another storage facility. So that was really excellent work done by the federal government at Germany speed, as it was called. Are you now happy with the situation? Of course, natural gas will remain a bone of contention. So are you happy with the general political situation in Germany? Do you feel that when you look at the natural gas market and the LNG capacities, we can be satisfied? Well, thank you. And I think it's true that many things were successfully done over a very short period of time, as you said, at Germany speed, not in every case, but the general feeling is maybe not really a true reflection of the situation. Once the crisis is fully overcome, we will not have to do so much to the same effect. And I have to say that, of course, it wasn't the government alone that dealt with the crisis. There was a broad consensus, and there was cooperation between the federal states, European partners, private partners, countries like Norway. It was really a huge joint effort that we made that was necessary and fortunately also successful. Going back to the question of whether we can be satisfied with the situation in Germany, I would say yes to that. Of course, there may be more points to be discussed, but basically this is also on the transformation and transition agenda. So basically what we have is an LNG infrastructure without, or let's say a 60% utilization of the infrastructure, so without full utilization rates, but we do have it. So we have the possibility to have LNG supplied to us at short notice, which is also expensive, but it's a possibility. So we have expanded our infrastructure. We have 4 at the moment and the perspective for a 5th one. And we do need these options. And I think as a perspective, we need to keep them. We keep these doors open because, well, you asked about a blockage or lock-in effect. I don't agree with that. I think we have controlled the main locations to the right effect, in particular Brunsbüttel and Stade. They haven't all come to the same point in the same time, but basically it is not about procuring gas at any rate, at any price. It is about providing the necessary infrastructure in order to open up the possibilities. Whether these possibilities actually need to be used will depend on the market. So the market makes the decisions. And when you get to the stationary terminals as of 2044, as has been determined, they will only be supplied with green gases, so that this feared lock-in effect can be prevented. So I think we have a high degree of flexibility. Also, with the floating opportunities or possibilities, we have one vessel that has floated on to Egypt, for instance. And when we have the stationary options, we also have additional capacities that are useful to us. And I think that was the idea of the government, and it is working. So you are resilient in terms of change. Let me briefly ask about Russian gas. I know this is down to the EU until 2027. The European Union will not buy any more Russian gas. At the moment, it still plays a role via pipeline gas. It comes into Western Europe via LNG as well. So will this happen? Is this going to be the full exit from gas from Russia? Let me first talk about the national perspective. The exit from Russian gas has happened. Pipeline gas, it is not just about the explosion of the pipeline, it is often forgotten that Russia purposefully reduced the supply via the pipelines with the pretext of maintenance, etc. So as of the summer of 2022, we did no longer get pipeline gas from Russia. And then after the explosion, it wasn't doable anymore, at least not with Nord Stream 1. Nord Stream 2 was still viable, but anyway, this pipeline gas is no longer viable. LNG gas is not supplied to the German LNG infrastructures from Russia, so we don't get direct supplies from Russia. We have one weak point, which we have to admit to, because we have the domestic European gas market. So in Germany, we have nothing directly, but we cannot exclude, because we do not have branded molecules, that via the European market, where LNG is being imported via Belgium, for instance, individual Russian LNG molecules get into Germany. That's the status quo. So keeping an eye on the phase out that was decided on the European level, the roadmap foresees a very quick exit till the end of 2027, and we are very optimistic about that. We want this to happen. And in the most recent package of sanctions, you see that the Nord Stream pipelines have now been included, which wasn't the case before that. At the European level, it's no secret that there is a broad consensus for this to happen, to be doable, and there are individual member states who are still more dependent on Russian pipeline gas, or Russian gas and pipeline gas in particular, but we will also find a viable solution for these countries. So I am optimistic that we can make a full exit. And within the European Union, we have all thought about what happens when we exit. And of course, we don't want an economic disaster, which was feared only a few years ago. Of course, there might be some scarcity, but the bottom line is that with the member states and with the European Union, we agree that this can be compensated for, among other things. That's why the German LNG terminals are so important. And that is something that I really believe in. It will happen. It will work. So that means for us, in particular in Northern and Western Europe, the long-term reality means that large volumes of LNG will go to Western Europe. We have to make sure that we have the right pathways for that. And I'm sure we will discuss this later, but from your point of view, as a representative of the federal government, what are the central challenges? Because one thing is obvious, a pipeline is a secure supplier because the seller cannot simply relocate the whole pipeline. So what is the task for the federal government? What can the contributions be in order to make sure that the gas does not just reach the German market, but also remains affordable? Well, of course, we do not just leave it all to the market and lean back and wait for things to work themselves out. And of course, that is one of the main tasks, to keep things under supervision. That's the task of the federal government. However, we have set the points to the effect that we have a very broad portfolio of options to secure our gas supplies. One thing are the pipelines. So the main gas supply is now coming from Norway. That is not LNG. And of course, another option is LNG terminals across Europe. In Germany, we have a lot of flexibility. Now,
beziehen. Also deshalb
when it
insoweit,
comes to
das ist ja schon die
importing
Bundesregierung
gas and
unternommen mit den
LNG,
Terminals,
that's what the federal
die
government has been aiming at
Gaslieferung
with
jetzt
these new
über andere Länder,
terminals.
sei es
So
auf
securing
Pipeline-Verträge, Niederlande
supply
oder
via other
Frankreich,
countries,
das
via
läuft ja auch
pipelines,
weiterhin,
be it the
wenn
Netherlands. This will, of course,
Unternehmen natürlich auch
remain an
Verträge
option when
abschließen wollen,
private companies
sei
want
es
to
über LNG, sei
conclude
es über langfristige, kurzfristige
contracts
Gaslieferung.
regarding
Das ist dann auch
long-term
immer
or
ein Punkt, wo
short-term
die
gas
Bundesregierung
supply. That
zum Teil
is something
gefragt werden
where
kann,
the
ob
federal
es dann auch
government
unterstützt wird
can
oder
be asked
das
for
wird dann auch
support.
angefragt. Das
And
ist
this
grundsätzlich
is
etwas, wo
being
auch
asked
im Interesse der
about.
Versorgungssicherheit
Basically,
auch
it's something
dann
where,
natürlich
in the
unter diesem
interest
Aspekt
of
sicher herangeschaut wird.
security
Von
of
daher
supply, the
ist das
federal
etwas,
government
was
looks into it
die
and
Bundesregierung natürlich
considers
auch sehr
it
vor Augen hat, aber auch
something
wiederum auf
that
europäischer Ebene, wie auch
needs to
innerhalb der
remain in their
Kommission,
focus, but it
dass wir
also
in der
remains
Lage
in the
sind,
focus
auch
of the European
mittel- und
Commission.
längerfristig die
They want to make
Gasnachfrage zu
sure
sorgen. Ist
that
aber
in the
grundsätzlich
mid and
natürlich
long
wiederum nicht
term
so,
we can secure
dass
our
manchmal
gas
dann
supply
auch
situation.
gedacht
However,
wird von
although
anderen
some
Staaten,
may
dass die
think,
Bundesregierung jetzt selbst beim Markt auftritt und
other
sagt, wir
countries may
kaufen
think
jetzt
that
wie
the federal
22
government is a market
Unmengen an Gas.
player
Also
and, like in
deshalb
2022,
finden mit den Unternehmen auch
acquires
natürlich diese Gespräche
huge
statt.
volumes of
Und dort, wo
gas.
Unterstützung erforderlich ist,
But this
wird
is
dies auch immer geprüft.
something
Und
that
das Ziel
will
sollte auch beidseitig sein,
not
dass
be
die
a
Lieferung gesichert ist.
regularity, but it
Und
can,
wenn
of
die
course, be
Rahmenbedingungen irgendwo
discussed. Support
anzupassen
can be
sein
given as
sollten,
long as the framework
dann
conditions are
ist man auch
right.
darüber im Austausch. Und das sollte im Rahmen
And,
natürlich auch so
well, we
möglich
are
sein,
keeping
dass dem nichts
our
erschwert wird.
debates open and we don't want to
Ich glaube,
be in
das
the way of
ist
such
auch aus
transactions.
Sicht der Unternehmen, glaube ich, eine sehr positive Äußerung, wenn Staat sagt, nein, wir sind
I
nicht
think this
diejenigen,
is
die jetzt
also
kaufen, denn wir
very
überlassen das den
important from the
Unternehmen.
point of the companies.
Aber
If
lassen
you
Sie uns
say
doch ein
it's not the
bisschen
state that
Wasser
is
den
buying
Wein
the gas,
schütten.
but it's left to the
Ich,
companies. But
gestern
let
kam
me
was
also
raus.
criticize a little bit
Wir tun uns
because
ja
this is
politisch
also
schwer
something that was
mit
mentioned yesterday.
Langfristverträgen. Das war ja mit
We
Händen
have
zu
political
greifen
difficulties
in der
regarding long-term
Gaskrise,
contracts, and this is something that we especially saw during the gas
jedenfalls die
crisis.
Politiker. Lücke, Sie
The
in Ihrer Rolle nicht, aber
politicians, not you
die
in your
Politiker da
role, but
draußen
the
mit dem Megafon unter der
politicians in
Nase, die
general
schwer
who
taten
were
zu
talking
sagen,
to the
wir
press
brauchen
had
langfristige
difficulty saying
Energieverträge,
we
wir
need
geben
long-term
die
LNG
Energieversorgung und
contracts in
Gasversorgung
order to
sicherzustellen
secure
in
the
einer
supply with
Rundmail. Das
natural
mal in diesem
gas
Eindruck
in a
gesagt, ja, wir wollen da
narrative
raus.
where
Und dieses
everybody
Dilemma,
else
wenn
said we
ich
want
das
to get
mal,
out of
ja,
this. And
also
this
macht werden ganz
dilemma
kurzfristig, ich habe da neulich
is here.
eine Studie
Will we
da
do,
mir
will
mir
we go
anschauen
for
können,
short-term
wie
supply? I
das
had a
wirkt,
look at a
wenn man
study
feststellen
yesterday.
muss, Spotpreise
Short-term may be
verfügbar und
expensive.
jetzt als
If you
strategische
use spot
Gasversorgung
supply
interpretieren
as
mit langfristigen
strategic as supply
Gasversorgungsverträgen,
compared to
dann wird es auf einmal
long-term
teurer. Ich
gas
meine, da muss ja
supply
eigentlich die Regierung
contracts,
eine Meinung zu haben.
suddenly it's getting
Schon
more
auch im
expensive.
Interesse
And the
der
government
Industrie
should
und
have an
insbesondere der
opinion on
Gasversorger.
this, also in the interest
Ja,
of the industry and the gas
ähm,
consumers in Germany.
sagen wir mal so, also das ist ja was ich sagte, also ein
Well,
insgesamt
let's put
grundsätzlich
it like
auch in dem Bereich,
that.
das wissen die
In
Unternehmen
this
selbst am besten auch,
area,
ist
and
ja
the
immer diese
companies know
Unternehmensstrategie,
this
ja auch viele
based
gelernt,
on
dass
their
es
own
natürlich auch
company
selbst erfahren, dass es nicht
strategy, that
gut ist, wenn
everybody
man nur auf
learned
eine
that
Karte
it's
setzt.
not
Das
good
heißt,
if you
genauso im
have
Hinblick auf
all
Kurz- und
eggs in one basket.
Langfristverträge.
So
Ich
you
glaube, wenn man
should
jetzt
have
einfach
a mix of
sagen
long
würde,
and
nur
short-term
langfristige
contracts. If you
Verträge
were
sind
to
gut,
say
weil
we'll
haben wir
only go for
perspektivisch
long-term
die Sicherheit
contracts because then we get
das ist gut.
security and
Und
everything will be
Langfristverträge sind
fine,
bestimmt ein wesentlicher Faktor.
long-term
Da kommt
contracts
natürlich
will
wahrscheinlich
be an
auch zum Teil
important
die Anstrengungen
factor,
haben oder auch
but
politisch.
then we've got the
Und was wir eingangs
points that
gesagt
you
haben, wenn ein Gas eine
mentioned,
Brücke ist,
also the
wie lang
political
ist denn die Brücke?
point.
Wie
If
lange können wir
natural
denn
gas is a bridge, how long will we
Gasverträge
need this bridge? How long
abschließen und
will
sollten sie
we
abschließen?
be
Das ist natürlich
able
alles
or
eine
should
Diskussion,
we
die
go for gas
die da mit
contracts? So
reinspielt. Wenn
these
ich
are
nämlich
all
eingangs sagte, bei
aspects which
den
are important here. Coming back to what
LNG-Terminals
I
ist ja
said in the
beschlossen worden,
beginning,
ab
for the
2045
LNG
sollen alle
terminals, it
Grüngase
was
kommen.
decided that the
Und der
fixed
Anbieter soll in dem
terminals only
Netzo
use green gas
kein
starting
reines Gas
from
mehr
2044
angeliefert werden und verarbeitet oder regasifiziert werden.
and no
Im Hinblick auf die Langfristverträge, die müssen natürlich auch
blue gas should be supplied. And
sich
regarding the
überlegen,
long-term
wie wird, das
contracts,
verstehe ich,
we
wie
also
wird
have to
die
think about
Transformationspolitik
the
der Bundesregierung aussehen?
transformation
Wird es so sein,
policies
auch
of the
grundsätzlich,
federal
wenn ab
government. Will we
2044 es
also
nicht mehr
basically
attraktiv
say that
wirtschaftlich
starting
oder
in
wie auch immer Gas
2044, it will
anzuliefern?
no
Das
longer be
ist nicht
attractive
der
or
Fall.
allowed to
Und
supply gas? This will not
ich
be
kann
the
Ihnen aber auch,
case.
was wir
Well,
eingangs besprochen haben, noch nicht sagen, wie lange
I
diese
cannot
Brücke sein
tell
wird. Das wird ja auch
you
jetzt so
how
ein
long we will need
bisschen
this
sich alles noch
bridge.
wieder
This will
auch finden
also
müssen.
be adjusted now, but the climate goals are absolutely clear. They are fixed, and also in view of the latest developments, I think gas will be used in a new flexible way, and this is also something that needs to be seen. So the government does not say we don't want to have any long-term contracts because this hinders transformation, but on the other hand, we also don't say, well, we want all the companies to have 20-25% of long-term contracts. The companies can decide best. They should find the best mix between long and short-term contracts, and this will also depend on the supply in the market and also the demand side. Maybe shorter contracts can go for better prices, but there's always a risk involved, and you always have to have an estimation of the future development. I think a healthy mix is required, and the companies will have to define what this means. And from the point of view of the federal government, we will also ensure that we will be able to ensure security of supply. And if you have the impression that we fall back into a situation where the solution might endanger the supply, then we'll have to take other measures. Mr. Lücke, so this is an encouragement to the companies to also have long-term contracts, and there are also contractual possibilities. But Germany will only burn natural gas as long as we need natural gas. And I would be happy to have the government say very clearly what this means. The companies, they can manage their portfolio and find their right mix, but that you as a government say this should be left to the companies is something that is absolutely right. Dear Anne Boers, it's 10:40 now on my clock. Can I ask another final question, or is it not possible? Yes, of course you can. Okay, then a final question. Depends on the questions, as Mr. Lücke. Well, I will try to keep it short, and I will also explain this. There's an EU methane regulation that says that we should reduce ethane emissions, and this is perfectly legitimate, and this is also implemented at European level. That's fine and dandy, but one decisive point is that the importers also have to make sure that their long or short-term gas imports will also be in line with the methane regulation. And we can see some resistance in the major exporting countries. Let me put it like that. Mr. Lücke, what can we do here? How do you help the importers if they suddenly are faced with difficulties? Yes, this goes in the direction that I mentioned earlier on. We, as the government, try to ensure safe supply with gas wherever it is possible, so that we do things in a way that they are manageable also for the companies. The methane regulation at European level is, of course, a major topic here, with more so with some companies or some countries than with others. It always depends on the supply countries and in what way they can meet the new regulations. But the goal of the methane regulation, as you said, is legitimate. It's good. We are not finished with the transformation. We are still facing climate change, so we have to try and find a solution to all these problems. And so the federal government is aligned, saying that there should not be an obstacle to long-term contracts. But it's not yet clear, also in the discussions with the EU Commission, how this can be done. There are various possibilities. Perhaps the regulation can still be adjusted a little bit. So intensive discussions are happening at this level right now in order to make sure that we will not end up in a situation where the required gas supply contracts are not taken out. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that we comply with the climate regulations and also the supply regulations. So it's like squaring the circle, but we are already in intensive discussions regarding this matter. Thank you very much. I think this also now brings us to a close in our discussion today. What I take home is that the federal government is very closely monitoring all the gas issues, and they are also dealing with the real contents. And there is also the insight that you want to act in the best interest of the consumers here. And the answers are, of course, not easy. Also, from my point of view, as an expert in the gas market, we just have to acknowledge this. And it's great, Mr. Lücke, that you say very clearly that the solutions are not obvious, are not easy to find. But the players in the market have to know what the government wants. It's important for the players to know that the government is also working on this. Thank you very much again, Mr. Lücke. Thank you, Mr. Möhring. And now I hand back to Anne Burs. I also would like to say thank you very much. It was a very exciting interview. I took many notes and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion on some of these points mentioned. But until that, we'll now have a very short break. We will shuffle around chairs and we'll be back in a minute.
Zur Jahrtausendwende war die europäische Energiewirtschaft in einem riesigen Umbruch. Die Messe Essen hat das damit verbundene Potenzial gesehen und das Thema besetzt.
Als Energiemetropole im Herzen Europas haben wir hier in Essen eine besondere Verbindung zur Energiewirtschaft. Unser zentraler Standort und das moderne Messegelände bieten die ideale Infrastruktur für eine Energiefachmesse von internationaler Bedeutung.
Die ConEnergy AG hat seit ihrer Gründung energiewirtschaftliche Fachveranstaltungen organisiert und mit der E-Trade eine erfolgreiche Messe mit stark wachsender Ausstellerzahl etabliert. Um die Veranstaltung weiter voranzubringen, haben wir einen starken Partner gesucht und uns schließlich für die Messe Essen entschieden.
Die E-World hat sich in den letzten 2 Jahrzehnten immer wieder gewandelt. Sie ist nicht nur kontinuierlich in der Fläche gewachsen, sondern auch thematisch vielfältiger geworden.
Inhaltlicher Schwerpunkt der ersten Jahre waren Vertrieb und Handel von Strom und Gas. Doch über die Jahre haben wir das Angebot der Messe stetig ausgebaut. Immer wieder neue Felder erschlossen und Raum für Innovationen geschaffen. Dazu zählt, dass wir bereits früh die Digitalisierung als Schlüsselthema für die Branche erkannt haben und IT-Dienstleister auf die E-World holten.
So gesehen ist die E-World immer ein Spiegel der Branche gewesen und heute in ihrer 25. Ausgabe ist die Messe größer als je zuvor. Sie versammelt über 70 Nationen und deckt die gesamte Branche komplett ab.
Wir werden auch zukünftig die wichtigsten Player der internationalen Energiewelt versammeln und innovativen Ideen eine Bühne bieten.
Gemeinsam haben wir die E-World zur europäischen Leitmesse der Energiewirtschaft gemacht. Im Februar feiern wir die 25. E-World und freuen uns darauf, die Erfolgsgeschichte fortzuführen.
Herzlich willkommen
hier auf der eWorld. Hallo und herzlich willkommen.
Live vor Ort auf der eWorld hier in Essen.
Wir sind endlich auf der eWorld und wir sind tatsächlich live.
Es gibt keine Klimaneutralitätsszenarien, die ohne Wasserstoff auskommen.
And there's people around us and we can wave and they wave back, which is amazing.
Herzlich willkommen zurück hier bei uns im Essener Studio. Ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie
Welcome back, everyone, to our studio here in Essen. I'm glad to have you here on our second day of eWorld Kickoff, and I will now continue in English because we have international panelists now.
Here in Essen. I'm delighted that you are joining the eWorld Kickoff and that you're spending today with us, and that we're starting the digital. We have the digital start to the eWorld season, eWorld preparatory times. And I'm also very happy to have Ludwig Möhring still with me. He is my co-host for today, but when I give back to him in a second, until then, let me just remind you, you have the opportunity to ask questions or give us your comments via a digital tool. You can scan the QR code to my site, and then you are in the chat room, so to say. You can ask questions. I will keep an eye on that and hand your questions over to our panel, so that we are good to go and have everyone involved in the very exciting and very huge topics that I think we will be dealing with today. So I said it, Ludwig Möhring is still here. That's great. We'll come back after the break, Ludwig.
Yeah, Anna, many thanks. And to be honest, without further ado, let's zoom right into it. And please to the audience, welcome to all of our 4 distinguished guests here who really bring a wide variety of gas expertise to this discussion. I really look forward to that, I must say. And thanks to Con Energy and the eWorld team too, who made that possible. Let me introduce the 4 panelists first, so that the audience is absolutely clear about this variety that we have now. And let me start with Michael Lewis, CEO at Uniper. Uniper, well known, of course, here, one of Europe's largest power generators, midstream gas supplier. Michael himself, he became CEO in 2023 after 20 years in the international energy sector, in particular E.ON. And from the timing you can take, he has led the development and execution of the new Uniper strategy to decarbonize the portfolio, but also to make sure that we have secure supplies for Europe's power and gas markets. Welcome, Michael. Great that you took the time to be part of this.
Good morning. Good to be here.
From a bit further afield, Andy Drummond, he is the Executive Vice President Strategy at Woodside Energy. Andy comes with a deep expertise in global energy markets, long-term planning, and the evolving role of natural gas in the energy transition across the globe. Woodside Energy, for those who have not come across the company here in Germany, is based in Australia, is a global LNG player with assets inter alia in the USA, in Mexico, Senegal, and also obviously in Australia. And as it happens, Woodside and Uniper signed some LNG contracts earlier this year. Welcome, Andy. Also great you could make it. Then we have Matthias Dorn. He's president of global procurement at BASF, and I don't have to introduce BASF. Matthias himself comes with a wide experience within the BASF group, expertise around resource strategy, and we really look forward, Matthias, to your perspectives on the role of natural gas in industrial transformation and in Europe's energy transition from your industrial perspective. But let me still make one final comment. Having worked in my previous career very closely to BASF as a customer, you're probably, I think, still the biggest gas consumer in Germany, but you've again, taken control over your gas supply by securing gas supplies, not just from Norway, but also including LNG directly from the US. That's a very interesting perspective you can add. And and welcome, Matthias. Sorry, I'm getting too quick here now. And last but no means least, Holger Lösch from the Federal Industry Association in Germany, BDE, 15 years on the board, and then he's now the deputy managing director. And as I've experienced many times, with deep insights both on the requirements of industrial gas buyers and the energy market at large, but also related to the global gas dynamics, and which is relevant, very relevant today, I would say, is very close to German and European policy making. And as I said in the first panel or in the discussion with Andreas Lücke, gas will never come without politics. That is one of the hard truths. Welcome, Holger. Great that you're here today as well. Very brief scene setting. Uncertainties wherever we look around the gas market. There have always been uncertainties. That's obvious, but this is more than we were used to. We are facing some very tough realities. The energy market is in transition, and that has created major uncertainties around future gas demand. We'll talk about that. This uncertainty adds to unprecedented uncertainties, I would call it, in the global gas market, not just because of Russian gas and the role of Russian gas in the future, but that adds to it. And last not least, in Germany, gas prices and as a result, power prices have risen to a level that leaves many industrial consumers in severe difficulties. Yeah, and now, and maybe we can carry that discussion a bit further. The big question is there a smart way out that helps energy consumers to have access to secure, affordable gas deliveries during the transition period, as long as we need gas? This is not about keeping gas as long as possible, but this is about how can the transformation work with affordable gas for our consumers. That's at the core of our debate. So having said that, now it's your call. And let me start with the role of natural gas in the EU. And that was different in the last decades. It will diminish, but the big question is, how will it happen? What are the developments we will see? And my big question with these uncertainties, where does that leave gas producers, importers, consumers? And from the introduction, you could all see, hey, hang on, we have a wide variety around this call. And let me start with those who consume the gas rather than with those who deliver, because they determine how much gas we need. Matthias, from your BASF perspective, how do you see the future? And we've had also bad news in terms of gas consumption from BASF in the last couple of years. How do you see BASF, or how does BASF see this developing, and how are you reacting?
So when you look at BASF, we use gas on the one hand side for our power plants, on-site power plants, also to produce steam for our production of chemicals. This is roughly 60% in Europe. We are using really in energy production, in steam production for our processes, and 40% are raw materials. So the 40% raw materials, of course, this ammonia, for example, but also other chemicals. So there we see already now that some value chains are not competitive anymore, because when you look at gas prices in Europe and gas prices in the US, for example, and also energy prices in the US, then of course, as a global company, you ask yourself, we must make decisions on where can I be competitive globally. And this is certainly very challenged with the current energy prices and also natural gas prices in Europe. So therefore, when you look at the transition, we see gas for longer. That's also why our Equinor supply contract is, of course, with a tenor of 10 years, rather for a bit of a longer run. So we still see the need for gas for longer as a raw material, but also as energy for our power plants. I think globally, from a BASF point of view, what you have to face that in the transition, of course, the energy is more or less from the electron to the molecule via methanol, ammonia, etc., is playing a tremendous role in decarbonization. But at the same time, it's of course for us as a company a raw material and a chemical. So therefore, we see new entrants in the market, shipping industry on methanol, ammonia, but also we need to decarbonize. Still holding up our target 2050 carbon neutral, and it's of course specifically for the chemical industry a massive undertaking because all of our raw materials are based on gray, and all of our energies are based on gray. So it's not just like with a consulting company. I offset the flights, I change to green energy. Everybody drives an electric vehicle with green energy, and then it's done. I think for the whole chemical industry, it's really a massive undertaking.
Yeah, there's no magic button, as I would call it. Thank you, Matthias. Holger, with a view to the German big energy consumers, how are they looking at the overall situation and the overall demand, and how things are developing?
Well, of course, after the price crash or the price spikes following the Ukraine crisis, I mean, all of these processes are watched with high uncertainties and a sort of a kind of fear. Where is this going? I mean, if we look at the German industrial set, I mean, gas-driven technologies have been a great part of the success of German industry in the past. They are proven technologies, and now with the transformation and of course with the price situation, all of this is at stake. I don't know any realistic scenario of getting to climate neutrality without a large amount of molecules. So the question is, are those molecules in 2045 or 2050, are they all green, or will there be some gray, which of course would be a contradiction to the climate neutrality target politicians set? And I've seen a lot of estimates where the gas demand is still going to be by 2045. I mean, we have today about 100 terawatt hours in energy. With yesterday, the new plan of Katharina Reiche will, of course, probably lead to more gas demand over the years. This might settle a bit down if the electrification is going further and the coal is going out. But in the end, there is going to be probably growing gas demand over the years in the power sector. The other thing on industry, so we've been at about 300 terawatt hours in the past after the crisis and after a considerable amount of deindustrialization, to be honest. So we are now at about 200 terawatt hours. There are estimates from like Standard & Poor's, which are saying industry probably is going to be at about 100 terawatt hours still in 2045, which of course would be a problem. So all of this, the uncertainty about how much gas we will need in the future, how far the electrification is going at economically viable prices, which is important. What is going to be my business case? What about processes which basically are not going to be reached by electrification? So there's a huge amount of uncertainty, which leads to a reluctance of investment. And then, of course, there's an uncertainty about the future climate policy. Looking at the 2040 debate we have in Europe right now, what about ETS1? What about ETS2? What about CBAM? So a lot of questions which are not good for industries which are anyway in a changing geopolitical environment, very much in doubt about their future. And therefore, we need some solid strategies, how we can, balance ecology and economy better and find ways into a future which is definitely less fossil, more green maybe, but is still competitive.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks, Holger. Well, where does that leave us? There's one thing we know that we don't know. Yeah, we don't know the future gas demand. Michael, that must bring me to you and your role at Uniper. So you must have a variety of views, I would expect, on where could future demand be, and in Germany, in Europe. So how do you respond from a supply strategy that is not trivial and less trivial than it was, definitely?
Yeah, I mean, this is an enormous challenge, no question about that. And I think Holger and Matthias have set out some of the uncertainties, and I'm afraid that's just a reality we have to live with. There is uncertainty. There's uncertainty in supply. There's uncertainty in demand. But what is important to recognize is, particularly in Germany, which is the heartland of European industry, we are very reliant on gas, and it is critical, if we are to remain an industrialized country, that we maintain energy prices which are competitive, while at the same time delivering our climate goals, and additionally ensuring we have security of supply. This is the so-called trilemma. It's an old trilemma, we're all aware of it, but I think it's come much more sharply into focus recently, given the challenges of the energy crisis and given the challenges now of still high energy prices. And we should say that we have around 20% of the German economy, which is reliant on industry. That's more than most of our competitors, 12% in the US, for instance, and that industry is under threat, as Matthias has pointed out. High prices mean lack of competitiveness.
Yeah.
The other key point to note is that we import 95% of our gas, and since the ending of Russian gas flows, and we were the largest importer of gas from Russia before the crisis, we have only around 50% of that on long-term contracts. So a large proportion is bought in the short-term markets. That is not a sustainable position. It's fine when the markets are liquid and there's plenty of access, but if the market tightens, that becomes a challenge. So that's the situation we've got to address on the supply side. And on the demand side, we are constantly reviewing our expectations of demand. And I think the key challenge here is how quickly, can we move to electrification? And the most important sector is, of course, heating as well as industry. And that's how quickly can we install heat pumps? That's proving a very difficult challenge. The second question is, how quickly can we create green gases? And depending on what you mean by green, if you move completely off natural gas, you're onto green hydrogen or ammonia. That has very big challenges in terms of price. More likely we move to blue hydrogen, which still means we need natural gas. So all of these questions are challenges. The truth is we have to manage that uncertainty.
Yeah.
Never going to come up with a perfect forecast. I've been in the energy industry over 30 years. Most of our forecasts don't last very long, and we produce a new one. And that's just reality, and ever more so today with all the uncertainty. So the key is we have to build resilience, and we have to build diversity and flexibility into the future energy structure, while at the same time bringing down prices. So for us at Uniper, that means rebuilding our gas portfolio after we cut off Russian gas, and Uniper imports no more gas from Russia. And that means creating a diverse portfolio. It means diverse in terms of countries, in terms of counterparties, in terms of contract duration, and in terms of price indexation. That way, we have a portfolio which can manage all of that uncertainty we've talked about. And we just have to constantly iterate and adjust our portfolio. And that may mean that we switch that to blue hydrogen at some point. It may mean we gradually reduce our contracted position over some point. We need to be flexible for all of those outcomes. But what we can't do is repeat the mistakes of the past, which is having a single point of failure and becoming over-reliant on one country. Now, at the moment, the US has obviously got a huge number of LNG projects coming in to operation, and we are and have contracted with more US LNG, but we need to look to diversify as well beyond that going forward so that we have the ability to bring the price down. And bear in mind, although we're nowhere near the crisis levels of gas price, the gas price today is still two times the pre-crisis level. And not only is that difficult for gas consumers, it also sets the power price 30 to 50% of the time. So it's a power price issue as well. So we need to bring that down to a range which is consistent with the marginal cost of producing gas and transporting it to Europe. And that means contracting more gas.
No, thanks, Michael. You have to deal with uncertainties, and that's what you're paid for, and that's the role of Uniper. And that's all good. And I would hope, to be honest, that also policymakers understand what you've said, which means there is no one scenario along which you can build the future. You have to have optionality in what you're doing because we don't know how it will evolve. Andy, from your, if you like, looking into geography, outsider's perspective, I know, and we had a chance to talk beforehand a little bit, that you're very close also to what is going on in Europe. So not just as an LNG producer, but also as someone from a different kind of market. How do you see this evolving in Germany? And how do you, as Woodside, how do you deal with the European market at large?
Yeah, so look, a lot of the points have been made. I mean, from a holistic perspective, we do really see that gas continues to today and will in the future play an important role, both in Europe and globally. So we have looked at it and had to look at the scenarios around the world. And we see that all three groups, whether it's the producers, the importers and consumers, we're all now anchored on this global LNG dynamic. So when we've looked at that, we've actually made the decision to take out a second node. So recently, Woodside actually took a final investment decision in the US at Louisiana LNG, which is now the largest foreign direct investment in Louisiana's history by chance. But we had to look at it through the lens of absolutely some of those volumes will be going to Europe, but also that some of those volumes will be going to our existing customers and other customers in other parts of the world, specifically Asia. But the other thing we have to look about for Europe is specifically, and you've talked on it, is some of the regulations. So when we looked at that project specifically, we really wanted to get comfortable with the emission profile of our facility, which is and will be below industry averages for LNG liquefaction, but also that will that enable us to comply with some of the policies that we're aware of and that are still being implemented in Europe, whether it's the Clean Industrial Deal or the CBAM. So we have to take that into account, and we have, and we're pretty comfortable with the project that we've obviously taken now an FID. But again, I think Michael said it really well. We also believe in the fact that if we have a diverse portfolio, we can help our customers. So we are trying to build and be flexible with the contracts we offer, so that it's a win-win for both.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you so much, Andy. Looking into the changes on the supply side that we've seen, and we have talked about the Russian gas issue already. Is there? Well, let me. No, hang on. I wanted to go to a different point first. If we look into, and that's a question to our gas consumers here, so Matthias and Holger in particular. We are now going into a supply strategy that will, to a large extent, depend on LNG. From a consumer's perspective, so industrial consumer's perspective, do you get the impression that we can have a stability of supplies and prices, and I'm not talking price level, that is at the same stability that we used to have in previous times? Or is there a level of uncertainty where you say, oh, hang on, it's really getting difficult on the gas side now? Let me start with Matthias, maybe.
So from our perspective, the good old times are over. Unfortunately, I think it was much easier, as you can imagine, as head of procurement to buy gas via pipeline and no LNG ships. That was, of course, from our perspective, much easier. We have diversified supply. We have just closed a 10-year contract with Equinor for a big portion of our demands. And then, of course, also LNG with Cheniere out of Gulf Coast, US. So I think we have diversified. We have a certain Henry Hub price risk, of course, now in the books. We are managing our own ships. So for us, it's much more work to be done to manage those chains, to optimize, etc., because we can't trust anymore on cheap prices out of the grids. So we need to take our own destiny in our hands here and have changed that. And I think we will see whether that really works. I'm pretty confident, but I think you will not have this kind of stable supply in the future. I think there's too much going on, and you have to take action as procurement specifically.
Yeah. Holger, your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, so before 2022, gas was like tap water. You just would open the tap and take the gas you needed. We had low transportation costs. We had, in general, relatively low cost. And there was a security of supply, which we presumed. And of course, there was not much dynamic. And of course, this educated the whole industry or made us into a sort of spot market addicts. I think Germany has the highest rate of spot market still in comparison to other industry countries. So this period of tap water is definitely over. I mean, I always hear, oh, shouldn't we have gone to US LNG much earlier? Sorry. I was in Houston at the Stara Week when the first ship sailed out of Galveston, when US allowed LNG to be exported. I think it was like 2016. So in the years after Fukushima, when the gas bridge silently replaced the nuclear bridge into the climate neutral future, there was not any possibility to get LNG from the US. So LNG, of course, higher transport cost, higher another step of conversion, so the liquefaction and so on, higher prices in general, a whole lot more dependency on global markets. This is something we have to accustom. And as we've seen, somebody mentioned it, the prices are still 2 times higher than they used to be. All of this is relatively new. We have to adjust. I think a lot of the players have done good steps to adjust to that. But in general, I would say that we probably will never get back to the 2010s dynamic where, I mean, prices went so low that it was not good for the producers anymore. We have to accept that for gas, for the time being, we will be in a global competition, and we need to diversify our importers, our producers, our sources. I mean, Australia is one thing, Canada is another thing, the United States is another thing, Qatar, so the Middle East, maybe north of Africa. So there is a variety of possible new sources, but of course, this is, as I said before, adding more uncertainty and higher prices.
Yeah. And that now brings me to our gas suppliers, if you like, Michael and Andy. Well, your customers, in particular industrial customers, they want predictability. Yeah, that's what they like. And you've heard it already. And to be honest, I'm not really giving up why LNG can't provide the same stability. But what would need to be in place that we get, and let's ignore prices. Price level, I can see. Let's ignore price. From a supply perspective, is there any chance that we can have the same, from an industrial consumer's perspective, the same kind of predictability and stability so that they know, no, this is going to work, and I know my prices, I've understood my contract and all the rest of it. What will need to be in place that you can create a situation that is very similar? I would expect that has something to do with markets being long and short and that kind of stuff. But I don't want to preempt any of the discussion. So, Andy, maybe yourself.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, what you're ultimately saying is, from a predictability perspective, is the market really balanced? So obviously we see these fluctuations in price if there's an oversupply or an over demand situation. And like Michael said earlier, I have the privilege in my current role of actually coming up with the forecasts and scenarios for our corporation right now. And as I start every conversation, every number you're about to see is wrong. The question is how wrong? Because what tends to happen is that there are events out with our control, and in the perfect world scenarios that we assume is balanced. And as was mentioned, we had 20 plus years of stable pipeline supply from Russia. Did we foresee the shock that we're still seeing working its way through the system? I think that it's taken 3 years and the market's still somewhat out of balance. It's getting closer, and I think that's why prices are coming down as you're seeing. But my crystal ball doesn't work in terms of what other shocks or global conflicts or global pandemics are going to come out of left field that ultimately will have an impact one way or the other and affect behaviors. But from our perspective, we're still very much from where we're at today. We would be advocating for government policy legislation to be stable and encourage additional supply into the market.
Important point, Andy. Many thanks for that. Michael, how can you help your customers?
I think that is absolutely our job definition as a gas supplier. It's our job to provide reliable and predictable supplies for our customers, and that's what we've been doing for decades, or we were doing for decades until the Ukraine war. But I think there are 3 key things. I've already mentioned one of them. One is we need to rebuild a diverse supply of long-term contracts. Gas is dispersed across the globe, and I think a couple of the commentators have already mentioned, we're looking at the US, Middle East, Australia, Canada, potentially. Russian gas is still there as well, of course, but it is dispersed quite widely. And we need to take advantage of that. And that's how you ensure stability, by having diversity. That gives you resilience. And so that portfolio we are in the process of building, and I'm pleased to say we did a deal with Woodside for the Louisiana gas, and so we've started that rebuilding process, and we've done a couple of other deals as well. So we intend to rebuild our portfolio, as I said, diversity not just in terms of countries and counterparties, but also duration and price indexation. The second thing, we need to make sure our own infrastructure is in order. And that means we need regulatory regimes which encourage us to have enough storage, and not just enough storage for the average conditions. You need enough storage when the conditions are very, very challenging. So that means you need a regulatory regime that ensures the capacity is there, even though it might not be needed very frequently. Just as we're looking to do a capacity market for power, storage needs to be regulated in a similar way. So I think that's important. And we also need to ensure there's enough regas capacity. So all of that needs to fit together so that we are resilient to the extreme cases. That will ensure that prices are dampened and they're not super sensitive to any potential increases in demand. And the final thing is we need to avoid single points of failure. And that's what we had in the past with our reliance 50% on Russian gas. It was a huge single point of failure. We must avoid that. And that brings us back to our question of a diverse set of counterparties and countries with which we deal. That will help us build resilience into the system. So I think if we get all of those things right, and we have a very important role to play, the federal government and the EU have a very important role to play to making sure all of those pieces of the jigsaw fit together.
Yeah, I think, nothing to comment from my end, but let me add one more question, actually, in terms of, because all the regulatory stuff has to be in place. I couldn't agree more. Ultimately, a lot will hinge upon will we have enough LNG in the market? And what we are reading here now in Germany, in many cases, there's a lot of LNG being developed, in particular in the US and elsewhere in the world. So we'll be safe. How do you look at it? And that goes to Michael and
yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. Over the next couple of years, there are a large number of projects coming onto the market. The US is absolutely committed to selling that gas into the world markets. You know, I was at Gas Tech a couple of weeks ago, or last week actually, and the Energy Secretary from the US was there very much in the mode of we want to help Europe and sell more gas. So that's absolutely the case, and there will be more projects to come online later. But as I said, there are other countries also looking to develop in the Middle East, Qatar, UAE, and of course Canada and Australia as well. And what we need to do is make sure we diversify our position and don't become over-reliant on any particular country. So I think there is enough gas out there. There are enough potential projects, but we've got to be willing to sign long-term commitments. We cannot expect developers to invest huge amounts of capital in LNG projects, liquefaction, and all the rest of it, and sell it into a spot market. That's just not going to happen. So we have to provide that long-term certainty for them. So that whole chain of investment needs to work, and we stand ready to do that, and we're already doing it.
Yeah, and let me add to that. That of course makes many people on the German climate protection side very nervous that you are asking for more investment. The big point being, there is investment then to fulfill a demand that is there. And it's not new demand you create, it's to fulfill the demand. But because otherwise people get into the wrong, and I'm completely with you.
One important point, sorry, just to come back.
No, please go.
Let's remember that one of the reasons Europe has been able to reduce CO2 so much so far is we've replaced coal-fired power generation with gas. We still have a large amount of coal-fired generation. We need to replace it urgently, and gas is the way in the short term in which we'll do that. Then we need to look at how we decarbonize those plants and how we move to blue hydrogen, CCS, and so on. So I don't see the two things as incompatible. I see gas as very much a bridging fuel, but we have to manage that transition in the right way.
Yeah, and it's important to make that point, Michael. I fully agree. Andy, how do you look at it?
So, I mean, from a global perspective, I think most people do foresee that with the projects that have been committed to, whether it's here in the US, Canada, Qatar, and in Australia, that there will be a tightening, that there could be oversupply as we head towards the back end of this decade. But then I think, again, if you take it out a little bit further, and obviously it gets harder to predict, but globally, we are seeing that demand will catch up, and that we could be back into we don't have enough supply for demand sort of by the mid-30s. So that's one of the, that's a call that we look at that helps enable our long-term investment decisions, such as Louisiana, which, as Michael said, these plants are here for 20 plus years, which again, I get the tension with the climate angle, but we feel there's enough certainty that the market will be there. I think history-wise as well, we've probably all experienced calls that have been similar to what we're facing now, that there will be a glut of LNG in the market. But when we look back in history, and it's not always a clear-cut analogy, but it always finds a home. And certainly since the onset of the war, there's been a lot of regasification plants around the world that have been installed that are currently operating at really low utilization rates. So, we're a big believer that the volumes will always find a home.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Andy. Good. Brings me to my next topic in terms of overall supply situation. Maybe we just briefly touch upon that. I also asked Lücke about the Russian gas and the end of Russian gas by the end of 2027. Let's not discuss whether that happens or not. Let's assume it happens, because they're very determined that we are not going to import any Russian gas into the EU. Yeah, we know where we are in Germany, but as a generic point, what does that do to your view on the market, that there will be no Russian gas by the end of 2027? Or are you all clear? No, we're already out of that system at all. Matthias, maybe again from a consumer's perspective first.
So it's a global market. Currently, we're mainly taking LNG ships from Russia into the grid. I think it's roughly 16%. And that will then just find another outlet somewhere, and where the ships go somewhere else, then the ships come to Europe. So I think it's just a readjustment of and load. I think
if I may, brief question, any views on price? And also to all of you then. Does that have an impact? Or is it just, no, it's just logistics?
No, just logistics. I think what was very important, I add this, I think in the whole green transformation, somebody needs to pay the 440 billion for the grid extension. Somebody needs to pay more or less for all the investments which are foreseen into green, into solar, into wind. Somebody needs to pay for the additional gas-fired power plants to ensure the stability of the grid. And I always look at it a bit from an energy point of view for energy companies. This is of course the biggest boom you have had since decades, because it is now very interesting because you can really invest again into grid, into the supply. You can adjust your infrastructure, etc. But somebody has to pay. And just to give you there also my 5 cents, this is in Germany prohibitively expensive. Alone the levies on gas storage, which we are still paying, has cost us over the last years 250 million as a company producing in Germany. At the same time, the same wind park, which we have built together with partners in the North Sea, and we're building one with a small participation in China, is a fraction of what it cost in the North Sea in Germany. So that whole thing, you get the same products, and this is where I think we are struggling massively. You get the same products, but with a PCF of 0, and the cost on top, somebody needs to pay. And I think this is the consumer is not ready to pay for a green Polo 30% more, and he gets the same car, the same usage. I think this is a bit lagging. I think it all sounds great, but finally becoming bankrupt in the green transformation, what we see in a lot of industries currently, is really a threat to the German industry. When the chemical industry grows and goes away, we are more or less delivering in all verticals like automotive, coating, wall paint, agricultural products, etc. When this goes away, and we see a lot of closures, also in Germany, Dow just announced one, then whole industry clusters go away, and they will not be there anymore. They will also not come back. So and this will all go to China, which is of course clear, because investing in China is a fraction of investing in Germany. So I'm always a bit flabbergasted here when people say, oh, it's all good, and then we just replace the gas, and no, this will have massive. Somebody needs to pay for it. And with double the gas prices in the US, where will I build an ammonia plant? Not in Germany. I will build the next ammonia plant in the US. Where will I build the next gasifier? I will not build it in Germany. By far too expensive. I will build it in China. So industry is currently, with those levies on gas storage, with all those investments into the grid, is heavily burdened and heavily challenged. And I think this comes a bit too short.
No, Matthias, thanks for this insight. And I think that has a lot to do with prices, to which we will come at a generic level, obviously, because we're all aware that we can't talk about prices in general. But let's quickly come back. And Holger, happy for you to also comment on the investment points Matthias has just made. But I started the whole thing with no Russian gas. How will things develop? Does it have an impact on the players here, or are they not? And that's where Matthias ended. Is that no, there are other things which are much more relevant to what we're hearing. How, from your expertise and discussions with the big consumers in Germany.
But I mean, on Russian gas, this is primarily, of course, a political question. I mean, they are at war with a European country. They invaded a European country. They are very much clearly testing the West if they could go further in Europe. And so I don't see a lot of hope for any sort of peace with the Russians. And if there's no peace with the Russians, there's not going to be any more Russian gas. And I would say that, I mean, I was asked by friends from the US gas industry and from the US Chamber last year, and I said, "Oh, is Europe going back to Russian gas?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And there was this wonderful idea of an American company being the mediator between Russia and Europe and selling gas with a little premium. I mean, I've seen the studies the US gas industry has commissioned to explain how much billions of damage this would do to the business case of the US LNG industry we just discussed. I mean, they are investing a lot. So if the tap, and they call it the open tap scenario in this one study I read, is going to open, I mean, this would do a lot of damage to the US LNG industry. And therefore, I'm definitely, well, not definitely, nobody's definitely sure, but I'm very, very convinced that this issue is not going to play a role in any near future.
Yeah.
But I mean, Matthias, this really came from the heart. I perfectly understand because I hear it almost every day in my position from SMEs, from large companies like BASF and others, how really upset they are that there is not enough understanding for their very complicated situation. And I would absolutely agree if there is not any better and less regulation, if there's not more respect for market mechanisms, if there is not less fine planning from a macroeconomic government perspective for a whole economy, and this is what is happening right now. I mean, we're going to fail with both things. We're going to fail with climate protection. We're going to fail with competitiveness and keeping ourselves a wealthy industrial location. And therefore, we really need structural changes. I mean, the new government is talking about some structural changes, but of course, if we look at the targets we are in, this, from today's perspective, only can be reached with a lot of investment and with a lot of additional effort. And what we're doing today is, I mean, we put in a lot of taxpayers' money to simulate the competitiveness of an energy system, which is definitely not competitive. And this can't go on forever. So either we find better ways, or we have to say this is not politically not feasible. And I would,
yeah.
I mean, I would choose the first thing, to find better ways, because if you say this is not going to work, and we spend billions to go that way,
mm-hmm.
If you now say, okay, let's stop it, so these billions are down the binge.
Yeah. No, thanks, Holger. And maybe now, and I think we will have to come to what can we do to improve the situation in a second. But I'm really curious for both from Michael and maybe quick. Is the end of Russian supplies to Europe at the end of 2027? Is it just a logistical topic, as Matthias put it? I know, of course, Michael, you mentioned it. You are completely out of Russian gas. So from a wider perspective, how do you look at it?
I think the key point is, I've said it again, we know Russian gas has almost gone, but there is still LNG supplies coming into Europe. That will go by 2027. They've made it very, very clear. Yeah. That means that we have to bring in new sources, and that's exactly what we're doing. I don't need to repeat it. Diversifying our gas supply, rebuilding our gas supply, bringing those volumes into Europe. So I don't see it. It's already factored into our thinking. I don't see that as another challenge. It's about making sure that all of Europe can benefit from those new LNG flows, and that the infrastructure is there to ensure that all of Europe gets gas that it needs. But absolutely correct, there are other issues affecting prices more important than the fact that Russian gas will expire in 2027, as the other commentators, Matthias and Holger, have mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. Very clear. Matthias. Sure.
Make one point. So what's then happening? Just to play that through. So that gas goes somewhere else. So the European Union says, okay, and then of course Russia needs to find an outlet. And with that, of course, you create the next problem for our industry, for example, because that Russian gas will go with a discount into China or India. Yeah, so when you look into India, and Modi said so, India is further importing Russian oil, for example. Yeah, the refineries in India are running full steam, because just imagine Germany would get a discount on the Brent price of 10 to 12 US dollar. This is like a testosterone shot for your economy, because one of your basic chemicals are 20% below global markets. Yeah, so you become much more competitive, of course, because your raw material is much more competitive in comparison to the rest of the world. Yeah. So therefore, you have, of course, with all of those sanctions, etc., effects that finally the chemical industry in India is highly competitive.
Thanks for that statement, Matthias. Actually, to be honest, and now to Andy, I can combine that one with one additional question I had anyway. There was this new MOU between the Chinese and the Russians related to Power of Siberia 2. I think volumes of 50 BCM, so more than half of the German gas demand. If we all throw that into a pot, and how do you look at it on global gas dynamics? What is happening? And Matthias already gave I think a very clear scenario here, which is far from non-realistic.
Yeah, look.
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I was actually in Beijing last week, and that was obviously one of the questions we were asking the folks we were meeting with, and just to put it out there, I find it quite interesting that we haven't actually seen any acknowledgement of the announcement or commentary by any senior Chinese official or Chinese NOC. So all the reports have been coming certainly from within Russia itself. It's a very different pipeline to the existing pipeline in terms of the route it would go through. And there's a couple of nuances with that. One is obviously Mongolia, who have been clear that they would like to obviously be a customer through the winter, which would reduce volumes available to China. And then when the pipelines get into China as well, there's still quite a spread in distance between where these lines come in to where the end customers are. So not everybody gets access to those molecules. So there's still a lot of these cities that have very large industrial demand that will never receive those molecules. So there will still be, and that's why they've taken into their own consideration their own regas facilities in a lot of these coastal towns to ensure that they supply their own security as well. So we, based on that, I would say we still view it as quite some time away, not in the immediate future, to even build a pipeline of that length. But also that we will still see the volumes are significant. But again, if supply does increase and prices do lower globally, there are a lot of buyers out there, whether it's within China or in other parts of Southeast Asia, that already have the infrastructure ready and waiting, and they're more price sensitive.
Yeah, it's a big global play. So I think let's see. So we have a couple of minutes left still. Yeah, that's good. Elephant in the room. Ultimately, it's about competitiveness. It's about prices, and obviously we can't talk how to organize markets, and that's not what we're here for. But as a generic question, also with a view to policymakers in the end. We've heard there's a lot of LNG around, so it's not about security of supply and these kind of things, but it needs to be organized in a way that gives us ultimately affordable prices. What can and we is along the value chain, including policymakers, what can be done to make sure that Germany, EU, Europe is able to receive gas, well, let's call it anywhere near the pre-crisis prices, as Michael rightly put it in the beginning of our call. What is the toolbox? Yeah, just blindly. Andy, do you want to start as a producer? How can you help, or what would you like to see?
Look, from our perspective, we're pretty consistent, and we've said it. We need stability in the frameworks that we're operating under, whether it's in terms of what carbon price there is in Europe. Where is Europe going from it? Michael said it earlier. We believe that they've got to maintain storage capacity or increase storage capacity moving forward, and we look for that long-term stability, and that those plans will be executed. So again, clear and stable frameworks that give us the longevity that we need to make these big investment decisions.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Michael?
Yeah, again, I would re-emphasize the regulatory point. I mean, we can do all we can in terms of bringing more volumes to Europe, and that will dampen the price. That will mean that ultimately, the production cost plus the cost of bringing gas to Europe should ultimately set the long-run marginal price. But we need the right regulatory frameworks, and it's not just in infrastructure. I mentioned storage and regas, but things like the methane regulations, things like CBAM and CSDDD, all of these regulations need to align with the fact that we're going to need gas for longer, and that we have to create an environment where there are multiple sources of gas available to Europe. I think that's what policymakers can do.
And that's where they can help. I couldn't agree more. Matthias.
I think lots of it was already said, fully bought into that. I think when you look into what is the cheapest gas is which comes via pipeline. Yeah, so because you don't have regasification, you don't have liquefaction, etc. So the cheapest thing is a pipeline. So the cheapest gas, I think, when you look into it, comes currently from a production point of view out of Norway, and there, of course, I think to enhance that, to give the certainty to Norwegian producers to explore more, that helps, of course, the market in Europe to be oversupplied a bit or get more liquidity in, and that, of course, helps with the prices. Otherwise, it's of course a fair grid fee. Yeah, so not that the grid fees on top and the levies are all used to finance something else. And then an ETS compensation and the methane rules also, that those are fair. I think this is crucial, not to even add more, because when you have now with the methane regulations of the EU penalties, then of course somebody has to pay it, and this will be then again in the grid. So if you just take gas out, it will be everybody will pay it. So I think those will be for me the most important. So really increase production where Europe gets gas pipeline supply. Yeah. But I'm also with the colleagues. I mean, the price setter will be LNG.
Yeah. Well, on the Norwegian side, to be frank, when gas was short, also Norwegian gas in 2022 was at prices at more than 200 euros per megawatt hour. It's supply and demand ultimately. Holger, what can we do also to the direction of policymakers?
Well, I think that the general demand I would have, and this is what I've been voicing for many, many years. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with going for a more sustainable energy system in the future. But we need to be more pragmatic. We need to be more efficient. What I do not understand is why if we really have this big problem, are not taking more risks, or why we are unleashing innovation in markets. And this is what's happening. I mean, look at the green hydrogen regulation of the EU. Who should invest in something which is so complex or complicated regulated in the EU. No, I mean, I've been to Australia in 2018. I had a barbecue on the Woodside headquarter on a hydrogen barbecue. So we talked a lot with Australia about green hydrogen. I mean, if they look at the regulation, why should they invest and why should they think about exporting anything to Europe? This is just too complicated. So we need a more pragmatic approach. And if you don't like it, but then you maybe have to accept it that gas is going to play a role. And the better and the more innovative we find other ways in terms of molecules being more sustainable or less emitting, pushing electrification forward. But there you need more openness and really give the markets and the innovators and the entrepreneurs a chance to solve this problem and not try to tell them how to solve the problem.
Yeah, thank you, Holger. Anne, we are a bit running out of time. If I may, one more question to the methane regulation. I can't resist. Again, I've mentioned it before. It's and make it very, very briefly. I asked and Lücke as well. Methane regulation, you know it, but for the audience here, it's perfectly legitimate that we get the methane emissions out of the system. And the industries in Europe are dealing with it. My question is to the importers and exporters, and we are blessed here with having both at the table. You are now confronted with an EU directive that says, well, the exporting countries must comply. I make it black and white now, must comply with the EU regulation. What do you expect for future gas contracts? How can you deal with it? What do you expect from policymakers, maybe? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Michael from being EU, it's you first.
I would say it's very, very difficult for us because, you know, if you take LNG from the US, it's unclear how we would even comply with the regulation because we don't have the data. And I think that's why I think it was Matthias who mentioned the word pragmatism. We need pragmatism in all of these things. Of course, we all want to reduce methane emissions from the supply chain. We want to make natural gas cleaner in every part of its end use as well as in the supply chain. But we can't do it by laying down regulations that are very difficult to comply with and which mean we restrict the places where we can buy natural gas from. So I would say pragmatism gives some general guidelines and give us the opportunity to do what we can to reduce emissions, but don't put requirements on it that it's unclear how we can fulfill.
As to it's the same. So we don't get the data as just said. So it's very difficult. When you then check the data, because of course we want to check the data, we have BASF, I think 30, 40 people who are nothing else than looking into product carbon footprints, and then you need to check the regulation around the globe, etc. And this is just a burden. And I would also totally vote for more flexibility, no dogmatism. And let the industry find the smartest way to decarbonize in the most efficient way, because we can't afford it. Otherwise, your goods will come from China in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Matthias. Andy, the exporter, how do you look at EU on that one?
Yeah, look, from our perspective, it's just additional cost into the system. So again, that from a pragmatic perspective, we hope that there is a pragmatic solution. We fundamentally believe in allowing the companies themselves to tackle methane, which is important. And Woodside is a company, we're signed up to the Methane Initiative, IOGP. But maybe I do see some green shoots, if you like, just to point out that the US-EU joint statement on the framework of agreement on reciprocal, fair and balanced trade, while they didn't explicitly mention the methane rule, certainly from the American side, it was clear that they will cooperate to address non-tariff barriers that could impact energy trades. So I think it's something that industry as a whole is aware of and is lobbying hard for.
Okay. Gentlemen, from my end, thank you so much. I think we had a great discussion. My personal takeaway, make it very crisp now. I think we're all clear. For the transformation, we need natural gas, and we need a lot, and will be relevant. And we need society, and we need policymakers to be serious about it. And with serious, I mean they need to have a strategic approach to how the gas consumption in Germany and the gas supplies in Europe will be conducted in the future at prices we can live with, both for the gas and the power side. And the other good thing for me was, as I expected, we have great players out there, and you four represented them, who know what they're talking about. I hope your insights go well into the political side as well. Having said that, Anne, over to you. Many thanks.
Thank you from my side as well. Yeah, we have heard so much about the changing markets, adjusting, diversifying portfolios, different prices, outlooks. So maybe, Ludwig, as a very last question, what do you think? How stable is the gas bridge? I think we can agree that gas will be a bridge in the future to a future. How stable do you think this is?
Well, let's be very clear. If it were not stable, so a typical German bridge after 40, 60 years, we would have to immediately rebuild it. And why am I saying that? We need gas. I was challenged by Deutsche Umwelthilfe yesterday. Well, it has to have the same fate like coal. I said, well, no. The good news is when we wanted to step out of coal, we could replace most of the coal with gas. If we want to step out of gas very quickly, well, then let's make sure that the alternatives work and are affordable. But as long as they are not, we need gas, and we need to make very sure that we will have enough gas at affordable conditions for the relevant players, as our four folks here around our call here today have, I think, made it very clear, very impressive to me.
Yep, absolutely. There's a lot to do, a lot that's happening, and I'm very excited to see where we go with this bridge, and staying with this metaphor. Yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you, Ludwig, for the very vivid discussion. It was a pleasure to watch. Thank you for your time in preparing all of this. Thank you to our four panelists, Matthias, Andy, Michael, Holger. It was a pleasure to watch and listen to your perspectives. Thank you very much. And also thank you very much to this team behind the scenes. That was great to have all of you make this possible. So the eWorld team, our live stream technicians, and also the two interpreters. Tomorrow, we will zoom from the European to the municipal level for this last day of the eWorld kickoff that we're facing then. Municipalities and small and medium-sized companies are particularly affected by the European climate legislation. So tomorrow, a panel will dive into how cooperation and the pooling of resources can help to master the energy transition on that level. If you have any questions in the meantime, please let us know via email, maybe if you have an email from us, or via social media. Would be delighted to hear from you what you think about today's discussion. So with this, I wish you a wonderful rest of a Wednesday, and I hope to see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. for the last day of the eWorld kickoff. Goodbye.
Okay, thanks again. Bye.
Für den letzten Tag des eWorld Kickoff.